Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast with your host, Jerry Rogers.
Welcome to another edition of the Business of America. And I do this every show because I'm so proud of what we do. This is different than other podcasts. It's different than other radio programs in so much as we bring the doers, those who are advocating, those who are building, those who make America work, those who understand business, entrepreneur activity, science, health, innovation. We invite them here and we have a conversation. And it's our hope, and thus far I think it's true, that policymakers and other media watch this conversation and help frame how we talk about these issues. And so today I'm very excited. Someone who I just recently quoted in a piece that I did for Real Clear Health, but Kirsten Axelsen, who is, and I'll let her give her own background, but a senior advisor at DLA Piper, a non-resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and I love AEI, I have a lot of good friends there, and also I didn't realize this, are you still at the Aspen Institute as well? I did some healthcare work for Aspen years ago, but you are in the company of good people, smart people. But welcome, and tell our audience, our listeners, more about your background, who you are.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, and also for having people on the show who are actively engaged with the private sector in helping to build the next generation of treatments and cures for hopefully longer, healthier lives. So my name is Kirsten Axelsen, and I've been working in and around the biopharmaceutical industry for the last 24 years, 19 of them in-house at a major pharmaceutical company, where I both led their policy team and as well as the business strategy team and business development analytics. So I have been both on the advocacy side of working in the biopharmaceutical sector, as well as in the making, hard business decisions where priorities and decisions have to be made about where capital is allocated. And not every promising scientific product isn't, it's not every time that scientific innovation gets to be advanced because there have to be choices made. I have also work as a consultant and I'm an Aspen Institute Health Innovator Fellow. As one of the things you invited me to talk about today was, where I see the future of innovation going, in particular in the U.S. and what the environment is like. And, there are a few things I would like to point out as we, look at R&D investment and the future, especially in a post-pandemic environment. We still do see that clinical trial starts are below pre-pandemic levels. They went up quite a bit during the pandemic. Fortunately, success rates, outcomes of clinical trials have gone up. And really, that is, I think, where we're going to have to go as an industry. The expectation of having a profitable medicine is part of what drives investment in clinical trials for a new medicine or for an existing medicine for a new indication. The expectation of profitability is going down, in large part because of policy decisions made in the U.S. The U.S. is 40% of all biopharmaceutical revenue and more like 50 or 60% for some of the newer specialized medicines like oncology. So as the U.S. is a more constrained environment for access, the only way we're going to continue to see innovation is if we can become more efficient in our clinical trials. And that's going to take some flexibility and understanding from the regulators around accepting trials that are maybe done remotely, done using adaptive designs. We can talk more about some of the ways, but really making the trials more efficient is, I think, the only way you're going to continue to have a thriving, innovative sector. At the same time, the U.S. is making this environment less hospitable. Other countries are both investing in their basic science capabilities, investing in their clinical trials capabilities, and also building up a system of intellectual property protection that is in many ways as hospitable as the U.S., if not more. The Chinese government has implemented reforms that look much more like our Bayh-Dole patent system, and have been building up the system of intellectual property over time. So as I see a future for innovation, it's going to, I'm hoping the U.S. environment does not continue to erode, but I do think we're going to have to leverage the world's resources to do not only basic science, but clinical trials if we're going to continue to see new medicines and new vaccines developed for the world's health.
Now, one thing I do sometimes when I have a guest or I want to learn something is I Google. So if you Google Kirsten Axelsen, you will see that she is prolific in writing about these issues. And part of what we do here is we want to help frame an issue so it makes it easier for policymakers or also those in the media food chain, so to speak, easier for them to write about it. And now you're saying clinical trials and intellectual property. And I think what happens with many policymakers is they're a little lazy when it comes to this. It's not the 30-second spot they're going to run in a campaign, or even some of the media who write about this. They want to talk about more provocative issues like reproductive rights or price controls or big bad pharma. It makes for more clicks. But one thing that you and I were talking about before we started to record is that we take for granted that America has this blessing, this innovative blessing of the biopharma industry here. And we turn them into a boogeyman very often. It's their fault for this or their fault for that. And I'm sure everyone does wrong things sometimes. But you mentioned other countries. It is not outside the realm of possibility for America's biopharma industry sector, the innovation, to move elsewhere.
Absolutely. I mean, it used to be, I think you could say, well, it's impossible, right? There isn't the capacity in other countries. There isn't the basic science. There isn't the trust. Well, other countries are addressing that. There's more investment in R&D and basic science in some of the other countries that have also both really good education systems. We've seen, in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, a lot of countries build up their capacity to conduct clinical trials. And when I say clinical trials, I'm talking about, testing medicines in humans, as well as the basic science. And, there was once a time when I think we never thought that we wouldn't all be buying American cars. And you just have to go out on the street and see that we trust the car manufacturing that comes from other countries outside of the U.S. So there is going to be a time where we can trust innovation from other countries. And I think in order to be prepared for that, there needs to be a role for the global multinational firm to also be able to thrive and conduct global clinical trials. So if you don't just want all the innovation to move out of the U.S. and European-based companies need to be able to be a thriving partner in investment in trials outside of the U.S. and within the U.S. It's part of it is, the environment that other countries are creating, but also as we develop drugs for diseases that are more targeted, more biomarker specific, we're going to need to get subjects from around the country if we want to enroll these trials as quickly as possible and get the medicines developed. So having a global network that is reliable and where you understand how the different regulatory agencies, and I mean like the FDA, are prepared for data being collected from other countries, and also that there's trust established that the studies are done consistently and well. To me, that's part of keeping a thriving, innovative industry in the U.S. as well as globally.
What are some roadblocks? What is keeping us from a more robust clinical trial environment, investment in that? What are some roadblocks?
So, to start with, in the U.S., there are very low rates of participation in clinical trials. It's even for people with advanced cancers where a clinical trial may be one of the best hopes for therapeutic advance. There are still, for getting a therapy that may address their cancer or not, there are still very low rates of participation. As far as, data collection from other countries, we still have So they say it's not harmonized. We still have systems where different regulators expect different things. There's not a lot of certainty when you bring a drug to the FDA and you've collected data from other countries, how much data is too much from another country, how much data is enough from another country. We do know that all biopharmaceutical companies are being asked to develop diversity plans to collect data from people of races and ethnicities who are underrepresented in clinical study. But it's also not clear how much of that data can or should be collected from outside of the U.S. Of course, efforts should be made to reach populations within the U.S. who are underrepresented. So there's just a lot of uncertainty. And to remember, developing a drug is already a super expensive, super uncertain business, largely because of the science. And as much uncertainty as you can take out from the realm of what will be approved and what will be reimbursed is important. And Jerry, I think you mentioned a bit about, reimbursement and access. We are developing and launching new drugs, often in smaller patient populations, but also in an environment where it's not clear what will be accepted by the insurers, and if there'll be additional hurdles, even above and beyond what might be clinically appropriate, that might make it more difficult to be financially successful, even if the drug is clinically successful.
It's interesting because a lot of how we think politically or how we think about markets, it's counterintuitive sometimes to how healthcare systems and the healthcare sector works. Because I'll give you an example. Conservatives think, well, we need to have less regulations. We need to reform the regulatory state. And that could be true in some areas. But sometimes it's, no, we need better regulations, more uniform regulations. So like you said, there's more certainty. I remember years ago, there was a big debate about whether or not, that states should decide on drug labels. And many on the right thought this is great. It's federalism, it's the states. But if you're trying to innovate and create new medicines and therapies and this sort of thing, you don't want to have 50 different regulators. And so a lot of this conversation, I think we miss, or some of those who make decisions or vote on legislation, or even sometimes derive the rules and comment on the rules. It's much more layered. It's more complicated. And again, I'm still trying, Kirsten, to wrap my head around this. My job, I like to think my job is to make the complex conversational. But this is difficult when it comes to innovation. Even the broader arguments of we should have less government in healthcare. No, we need more government in healthcare. We don't have a single healthcare system. We have systems. We have, and then we have insurance, and then we have the PBMs. So it really is this this overlapping system that I think deserves more conversation. But there are some tenets, some principles I think we can agree upon, and that is we should not hinder innovation. We should respect property rights. I know that vaccines, the piece that where I quote you is a vaccine piece, and we know from COVID that, and I might get some of my figures wrong, but 3 million plus lives saved, vaccines. I think there was nearly 13 million in saved hospitalization costs. There was billions of dollars saved in hospitalization costs. My point is that sometimes one intervention like a vaccine will save money and lives, but we don't want to talk about that, or we can't talk about that sometimes because our ideological preferences get in the way. But can you talk about how sometimes, and I think you said this, and that is vaccines are truly cost effective. They're worth more than they cost.
Yeah, not every health intervention is, right? Sometimes living longer just costs money. And that is something I think we have to grapple with as a society. If we want to live to be 95, that's going to cost money. It's a good like any other good, right? Living longer. And vaccines, though, over and over again, it has been confirmed that vaccines save money, right? You avoid other types of conditions, hospitalizations, loss of life. And so having as broad of access as possible to vaccines in places where it's convenient, where the providers are trusted, and the provider, maybe a pharmacy. Part of a provider role is you have a community conversation. That was one thing I think that really was interesting and happened during the pandemic. We were all talking. Oh, I got my appointment. We knew what the criteria were. You knew when your time was to go because you had these risk factors and you knew who got to go ahead of you. And we were all educated, and there was broad access. Not everybody is taking up the vaccines now, which is something I think we've talked a bit about how to address misinformation and hesitancy, but there was broad access. And so preserving an environment of broad access and choice is important, not just is important in a pandemic in particular. If we narrow down, we're only going to use this one vaccine and we're only going to supply this one vaccine, or you could also say that for other treatments, you put yourself at far more of a risk of a shortage, right? Because at a certain point, companies are going to say only 1 or 2 vaccines are going to be chosen. I'm not going to invest in developing it. Developing a vaccine is already often not a great financial proposition. So I think preserving an environment where there are multiple vaccines, because there are some people for whom one may be less effective than the other, or they may have an inability to tolerate one, but also for the supply reliability. You want to have, for all therapeutic areas, including vaccines, multiple providers, multiple suppliers. We have this, there's like a political reaction to, it's a Me Too drug. You want Me Too drugs. You want to have an environment where there's 3 or 4 or 5 things that can treat your condition. One, because it's good for health, because that one drug might not work for you. It's good for cost, because there's competition, and then there's, fighting to get formulary position by offering rebates. And it's good for supply certainty, because maybe one isn't available, or it turns out one works better than the other, and one goes out of the market.
It's funny. Years ago, I'll date myself how old I am. I worked on the passing the Medicare Modernization Act. And if you look back to think about a health insurance plan, Medicare, that did not have a drug benefit, seems nutty. I mean, it seems crazy that you'd have a health insurance plan but no coverage for medicine. And what worked about the MMA at the time was that you had Senator Kennedy's office, the liberal lion of the Senate. You had a Republican administration, the George W. Bush administration. In the beginnings, at least, they were writing this and compromising and arguing and putting together a package, and it worked. And why it worked, I think, is because it takes the best components of the private sector, competition, but also then the best components of the public sector, needed subsidies and protections. And one of the few government programs that the users love. I mean, again, everyone complains here or there, but for the most part, Medicare Part D is a huge success in terms of better health, in terms of patient access, and also in terms of cost. Mm-hmm. And I think we saw some of that again with Operation Warp Speed, where you had the public sector and the private sector work together. And again, what usually takes 10 years and $3 billion to take a new medicine to market was done in approximately 10 months. It was a medical miracle, I think. Some of the issues you highlighted, like investments in clinical trials and these other issues, do you see a way where the public sector and the private sector can work together for better health outcomes, better innovation, greater access?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I'll start with your point on Medicare Part D. Medicare Part D is one of the few success stories in American healthcare. Yes. There are plenty, and I'm being a little bit glib with that statement. There are plenty of amazing success stories in surgeons, in hospitals delivering great care. But what I mean by success stories is the costs were contained, a lot of people used it, and there's largely still choice. There were things to be fixed in Medicare. Some of those were fixed by the Inflation Reduction Act. There are things in Medicare that I don't think should have been interfered in, such as the market working to constrain prices and costs. And that has been interfered with by the federal government. I think that poses a real risk to the thriving public-private sector partnership we had. I know that there is a lot of political thrill that comes with pointing out the high price of a drug, but in reality, after discounts, drug spending in Medicare has remained one of the slowest growing parts of the healthcare system. Drugs are the least insured benefit in the US. You pay more out of pocket for your drugs than for anything else. And so, one way to encourage innovation in medicines would be to address some of these issues and hurdles to access to medicine, whether by lowering the out-of-pocket cost, which is something the IRA has done to an extent, or ensuring that the other hurdles to getting access to care, such as prior authorization, really are clinically based and patient-friendly. So, those are sort of some of the types of ideas that I think would create an environment for innovation that would not only be good for biopharmaceutical companies, but good for patients. Because let's also remember, as we're having all these conversations about our concerns about the cost of gene therapy or the cost of obesity medicines, it is still the case that single-digit percentages of people are actually getting access to these treatments. And people can say, oh, it's a cost issue, but that includes people who are in well-insured systems where they would be able to get access to it and be able to afford the out-of-pocket costs. There's not necessarily the outreach and awareness to people who are experiencing these conditions that there are treatments available where they could, potentially improve and extend their lives.
My mom and dad are, thank God, living longer. Maybe it's expensive, I don't know. But you're right, though. We want to live longer. We also want to live better. I want to play golf when I'm 80. So it's not just about living. It's about the quality of life, too. And medicines and innovations help us live longer, but also the quality of our life is greater. But my mom and dad are my mom will get angry with me, but my mom is approaching 80. My dad is well in his 80s. And they go to their doctor, and they depend upon conversations with the doctor, the nurses, the practice to keep them informed on what's available in terms of vaccines and new medicines. And a worry I have as a son, not just as someone who's involved in healthcare policy, but I love my parents, is that they go to the doctor, and what if the doctor's preferred vaccine that he says or prescribes, and then my mom goes to the local pharmacy and they're carrying a different vaccine. I know my mother. She's gonna say, and she's gonna walk out, and she won't get, and my father will walk out because my mom makes a lot of the healthcare decisions. And there are two people who are not gonna get a relative low-cost medical intervention to keep them healthier. They're gonna walk out and not get it. And so, to your point about reimbursement, to these kind of bureaucratic decisions, how health insurance and PBMs work in our system, I think everyone can agree, right and left, that more choice, greater options, more access, especially for vaccines and medicines, makes perfect sense because, to your point, right, the medicine growth in terms of the healthcare dollar has been sustainable. But then again, if you think a bigger picture, if you don't get a vaccine and you get sick and you end up in the hospital, it's going to cost the patient more money, the system more money. It's going to cost Medicare more money, and also you might get negative health outcomes. So talk about how. Well, and again, I'm going to put you on the spot here because I'm talking out loud to think, but how can all these systems work better together? Maybe there's a role, we haven't mentioned this yet, maybe there's a greater role here for patient advocacy groups. Mm-hmm. But what do you think? Well,
yes, and to your first point about access to different medicines and vaccines, often decisions are made to grant, to narrow a formulary or narrow access based on very limited data. The worst data you ever have about a drug is the data that's in the label, right? The clinical trial data is the most limited information. It is done is collected in a clinical trial setting that is very restrictive, very controlled. After the drug has been on the market for a while, we get more and more information about it. We know how different drugs work in different people. Some of the early work I did when I became involved in the biopharmaceutical industry was looking at how in Medicaid formularies, if they restricted the number of medicines that were available for hypertension, people just stopped treating their hypertension.
Yes.
Even though on the label they were all good at reducing blood pressure. Well, you're stable on one thing and someone tells you to switch to another thing and you don't feel good because everybody metabolizes things differently. And it's a little bit to your point about, if your mom goes and doesn't get the thing her doctor recommended, she's going to walk away and maybe not go back and get that second choice. So ensuring there is choice and easy access so that people can do the things their doctors want them to do and they want to do, I think is very important. And then as far as systems working together, we do not have an interconnected system of information. And that is a real tragedy. We still have data being collected in silos. And I think some of that comes from a fear-based policy environment where when we went in, to implement electronic health records, there was reasonable concern about privacy, but that concern about privacy over-rotated every other discussion where really there should have been a hyper-focus on interconnectivity. I have a concern as we go into discussions around artificial intelligence that we're going to focus entirely on the harms of artificial intelligence, which is important, but also it's important to not take away the important benefits. We always want to have a doctor or a human decision available to guide artificial intelligence or any kind of large data processing. But, maybe this is an opportunity to fix this interconnectedness issue as well, because we don't have common data systems, but large language models might be able to make them more common. But that to me is a real opportunity to trying to find ways where we can track people over time better, because the lack of care given in Medicaid or the lack of care given by an employer just becomes a problem for the Medicare system down the road.
It's interesting. You mentioned artificial intelligence, and that has become another controversial topic. Now, again, my life, I meet physicians and patient advocacy advocates, smart people like yourself and those involved in the industry, but also in the think tank world. And everyone I've talked to in terms of health care, they see an enormous possibility here. Yes, you have to protect against what might go sideways, but I've talked to doctors, and doctors are so excited about how this could help with information and with data, with coding, with myriad issues that will allow doctors to be doctors and less bookkeepers. And then there's a piece today up at Real Clear Health about the enormous possibility AI and medical scans and how that and it goes on and on and on. And it's easy to point out the troubles, the challenges. I think I almost said AEI. I think AI offers great potential in healthcare for, again, access, for innovation, and also just for the data collection and coding and these sort of things that a lot of people outside of healthcare don't even think about. And I know you just commented on it, but are you where are you? You're mostly positive. You're a despairing optimist when it comes to AI, or are you more like we're going to mess this up?
I'm mostly positive on the potential, especially in the drug discovery space, where being able to interrogate and consider the potential of either prior clinical trial data or arrays of potential genetic targets. I am concerned we're going to screw this up in the delivery space, because that tends to be where we do mess things up, either by denying care for people who it shouldn't be denied for, by overriding a physician's judgment, or by creating an environment of liability for physicians that is not new and welcomed. I think as we think about regulating the use of AI, it should be thought of as a companion tool. We wouldn't let a computer make a decision about a patient, but we would let, information that could be stored or analyzed on a computer help inform a decision about a patient. So that, I think a lot of promise, and where things tend to always get a little messed up is on that last bit of the delivery part of it. So that's where I would love to see us being thoughtful about the use of AIs in the delivery space.
When I think of artificial intelligence, its potential broadly, but specifically to healthcare, I think of Star Trek. I love Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock and Bones McCoy and the rest, and Mr. Scotty. But the fact is, they relied upon technology and essentially artificial intelligence. But Captain Kirk always made the decision. So if maybe we'll jointly write this. Our next piece is how the Star Trek model for AI in medicine, because I think you're right. I think this is. I don't want to mess it up. I'm a despairing optimist. There's so much potential, but it seems to me that sometimes policymakers and regulators think that you control cost only by limiting access. And I think that, again, if I were to wave my healthcare policy magic wand, I would make it so much easier for patients to have access to new medicines. Because I know from personal experience, but also from policy experience, that investing on the front end, so to speak, on new medicines saves us money on the down end in terms of hospitals, but also the other costs that go into someone who is sick, having to take off time from work, having to invest more in childcare. It just seems to me that sometimes what's logical and rational, we ignore it, which I guess, it's a good way to kind of begin to wrap things up. If you were in a room with the decision makers at the various agencies, but also at the committees who make these decisions, and they said to you, Kirsten Axelsen, you come up with the one topic. I know one topic is I hate when either would you rather. What would be the one topic if you have all of these decision makers in a room, and even maybe those in the industry as well? What would the one topic be that you would want to discuss with them?
The one topic, and I think the real crisis in healthcare, is undertreatment. And treatment doesn't need to be expensive. More than 90% of drugs are generic. There is a huge amount of undiagnosed illness that progresses to very serious conditions. And we should be spending more of our time on how do we get to a system where there is more treatment, more diagnosis, and less human suffering, early mortality, more ability to go to work. And we spend so much more time worrying about overtreatment than undertreatment.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. And the funny thing is that, and I know this is cliche, but it's cliche because it's true. When I first came to Washington, D.C., there were a lot more conversations across party lines and ideological lines. There was a lot more arguing, but like in the best sense of that word. No one expected everything, but you'd get a slice of the loaf, so to speak. And we don't seem to be in that environment right now. But on healthcare policy, there seems to be more agreement than disagreement when you get into the details. The politics of it, the 30-second soundbite sort of a thing, we seem to be worlds apart. But when you get into what you just said, I can't imagine anyone who understands, who has your understanding and is in this sector, who would disagree with that. So I guess my hope is that you continue to do the good work you're doing, because your voice matters, and it matters. I say this all the time. Politics is personal, because when a regulator decides this, or Congress decides that, or the president signs an executive order, or a company decides not to invest in a new cure, there are system consequences, and there are political and health consequences. There's also personal consequences to your family and to my family. And so I appreciate this conversation very much. I hope we do more of this, but on the pages of Real Clear, I'm an editor at Real Clear, having your work featured there. But before we let you go, though, is there one thing that I should have asked you that I forgot, or because I'm a stammerer or whatever, I should have raised and didn't? Is there something that we should cover for our next show? How about that?
Let's cover our next show. I feel like we covered a lot of ground on this one.
Well, anyway, so thank you so much. Again, to our audience, thank you so much. All of Kirsten's bio and the work that she does, we'll make sure that it's attached to this podcast. This has been another great conversation, another great Business of America. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
This has been the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast, hosted by Jerry Rogers. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream